Todd, where this isn't a formal hearing?
It's still a posted meeting, so we should still take roll call.
Okay, so if you do the roll call.
Very good. I will begin with Chair Gerard Ahern.
Present.
Andy?
Here.
Very good. Brian? He already notified me that he will not be in tonight, so we'll move forward. Brad?
Here.
Thank you, sir. Elizabeth?
Here.
Thank you. And I believe Gabrielle also mentioned that she would be out, so she was noted as presently absent. We'll see if she arrives later on. But with that, we do have quorum present, sir.
Perfect. So I guess the purpose of this meeting is to have a discussion regarding the potential new Neshoba Regional High School, correct? And some aspects of it that potentially could qualify under the Dover Amendment, which is part of the Mass General Law, but or whether it falls under local zoning, Chapter 40A, Section 3. Section 3. Section 10. Dover, right? Okay.
Mhm.
So why don't you have the representative who's going to speak about the project, start off?
Okay, me. My name is Joe Milani with Castle Booz Architects. Introducing some other people from our team that are present at the meeting today. Craig Olson, project manager from our firm on this project, is also on the call. Attorney Joe Gleason, who is the chairman of the building committee, is also on this call. I don't know if Marianne Williams or if Kirk Downing are yet on the call. I'm guessing not.
So I think
Oh,
Marianne.
C's here. Okay.
Hi.
Thank you.
I think Marianne is on the Teams call, so I'm texting her now.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, she's.
Yeah, I saw her on the Teams, and then when I saw that Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, I can forward her the invitation from my email if she's missed it. You obviously have it too, because you're on the call. So I believe that's all the people who are present right now. Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to pull up some information that was sent previously? I do have some other things I can show, photographs and stuff like that, but if you want to just go to the floor plans and the bird's eye view, that would be fine too.
Yeah.
Mr. Milani, I did authorize multiple shares, so you should be free to share your screen.
Oh, okay. And forgive me, it is a while since I've been on a Zoom call, so let me see if I can do this. Can everyone see that floor plan?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. And I didn't kick anybody out, so. So we're currently working on the floor plan for the new Neshoba High School. We had gone through several iterations previously in the studies. We are currently in the schematic design phase. That phase started in January. And previous to that, we went through 2 feasibility study phases that narrowed down the possible solutions until this one solution was the one that was voted on as best suited, both by residents in an informal poll and by the school building committee and the school committees for the towns. As I said, we're in schematic design, so we are only starting to look at some of the specifics of the layouts. I know this looks extremely precise because it's drawn on a computer, and I hate to give false precision when I'm looking at information from a computer. It is still in flux. We do have changes that occur virtually daily as we develop the plan. The purpose of this call was that as we got into the schematic design phase and we're looking at the specifics of some of the conditions in the building, we realized that, as had been mentioned by Chief Legendre before, that there's a 32-foot height limit in the town, and that this building in some cases will probably be above that height limit. Just to bring everybody up to speed where we are.
Will they be on the same footprint of the existing? Is it going to change?
No, I can show that to you in just a second on the plan.
Okay.
This is actually option 4D. We went through, I believe, 8 or 9 options before we arrived at this one being the one that came to the fore. This fits on the new, as a new building on the site. If you know anything about the existing building, there's a baseball field right on top of where this sits in a parking lot off of Main Street. Main Street is down along here. Okay, this gray you see here is part of the existing building. This is the westernmost wing, the most recent wing of the building that was built. This is another part of the building that's here with classrooms in it. The building continues over with the shops and the cafeteria in this wing, and it continues over this area with gymnasium, auditorium, and stuff like that. So we're really, although we're fitting it in, we're really squeezed with restrictions on the site. We have the existing building we have to build around because the people are going to be in the existing building while we're building the new building and then moving over after the new building is completed. We have the retaining wall and the difference in grade between our building and where the existing football stadium is. Along the top of the site, in the northern part of the site, there's an easement with a gas pipeline, Tennessee gas line that runs through the site that we cannot cross. On the western part of the site, we have a steep grade change going up to the fields and also a buffer you can see here in this curved line for the wetlands. And then to the south, a small pump house building for the septic system on site. All of the water from existing wells and the septic systems are disposed of and sourced on site. The way the building is arranged is in this very tight footprint, is entering from the south into a common space, which is basically the cafeteria, as well as a central hub for the school off of this common space, which is a 2-story high space. In front of you is an auditorium. All the major spaces in the public spaces in the building are accessed off of this common space. So the auditorium to the north, the gymnasium to the east, and the media center to the west. Beyond the media center and in the secure part of the building are 2 classroom wings. We call them small learning communities or pods. But these 2 small learning communities are 2 stories high, each one. The major spaces on the public side of the building, the auditorium, the gymnasium, are both 2-story spaces, although they only have a first floor, they don't have a second floor. The service parts of the building are further to the sort of kitty-cornered in between the stadium and the gas pipeline. On the bird's eye view, you can see the arrangement and how it sits on the site. So here you can see the outline of the existing building, which is where we'll rebuild the new parking lots that we're displacing with this wing and the new baseball field in this area where the existing building is. New wells will be constructed up on the northern part of the site to access the building from the north, and new geothermal wells will be constructed on the southern part of the site and go around the building to get into the mechanical space. Here you can see the arrangement. We've got a gymnasium is a kind of a high roof. The auditorium where the stage is a high roof. The classroom wings are well under the 32-foot height at the moment. As I said, this was sort of a snapshot in time. If I showed you the plans and the elevations today, they'd be slightly different. And again, we are in the schematic design phase. The importance of the schematic design phase, if anyone has not been through, most of us haven't been through an MSBA funded project. Although schematic design sounds fairly schematic, it really is not. Unlike a lot of other private projects where the budget is developed and isn't known until later on in the project, with an MSBA project, the schematic design phase and the estimate that comes out of it sets the budget for the project through the rest of the project. You cannot change the budget after that.
What's that acronym you're referring to? MSDA?
The Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Oh, MSBA, okay.
Who is the state funding agency for a portion of the project.
Okay, Thank you.
So under the grant program that this school is being built under, we have obligations to follow their guidelines, and part of their guidelines is as I just stated. So
Okay.
So this building, as we said, as we've developed it, as we've only been working on it a couple of months now, but as we've continued to develop it, we found that when we got into some of the structural design and some of the further discussions with the district about programmatic needs and the needs for specific class types, we found that at least in two conditions right now that the building is going to be higher than the 32 feet. And so that triggered with us the need to have at least this introductory conversation with the board that we would need to go for some kind of a variance. And we've, as a firm, we've always, prided ourselves on being good neighbors and faithful followers of ordinances. And we've always tried to get variances for what we've tried to do in different schools, but we've never ever used the Dover Amendment.
Mhm.
And although it's been suggested, we would probably strive to get away from that thought process. We would prefer to go through an equitable resolution with the municipalities to come to, a resolution. So the issues that we found initially, like I said, and it's only two examples, are the gymnasium and the auditorium. The gymnasium, as an example, has a requirement through the MIAA, the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, that basketball games and volleyball games have to have a minimum clearance to obstructions in the gym of 25 feet or more. So with that in mind, we did a couple of wall sections and decided to figure out with our engineers how big the trusses had to be to cross that gym. And as it turns out, I've listed it here at 35 feet, but actually in more discussions with our structural engineer, it turns out it's more like 37 feet. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of things that are below the depth of the trusses that need to be accommodated in a gym, as well as the depth of the truss itself. So if you were to consider 25 feet as being the bare minimum, and the depth of truss that we're getting from our engineer is between 8.5 feet high, that brings us to 33.5 feet high. The thickness of the roofing membrane and the blocking and everything on the perimeter in current codes will bring us up another almost a foot. That gets up to 34.5 feet. And then we have to consider the items that are below that truss height that might be an obstruction in the gym. And if I could show some photographs, where did I put those? The existing gym also has the same problem, and I'm not sure. Shoot. Where are my photos? Here they are. So the existing gym, as you can see here, the trusses are just below 25 feet, like at 24 feet, but you also have underslung mechanical systems that hang down below the trusses. You've got ductwork that hangs below the trusses.
I don't think we can see your image. I'm not sure if anyone else can.
Did it stop sharing? Okay.
Yeah, we're stuck on Revit at the moment.
It says I am screen sharing. Oh, but it's not showing the screen. That's weird.
Yeah. It's just like the back end of your what you had up.
Let me try to go in again. Share. Funny, it didn't pull it up.
There we go.
You can see it now.
Yeah,
So in the existing gymnasium, the existing trusses are just below 25 feet. But there are other things that have to occur below those trusses, as like mechanical units here that are slung below. You can see 2 or 3 feet below. Ductwork that hangs down below. There are light fixtures that are down below. And one thing this gymnasium doesn't have that we'll have to have in ours is a drop curtain that comes down from the truss level down to the floor of the gym to divide the gym into 2 or even 3 learning spaces. It'd also be used to divide the gym when you're having, say, a JV volleyball game on one side and another game on the other side. So that hangs down another 2 or 3 feet also. So if we add another 2 or 3 feet to the condition we just had at the 35.5, we wind up at about 37 feet. And that's at a minimum. When we look at the need to have some height on the gym also, and I'm afraid to share the other photograph. I'm not sure if this will work.
Yep.
You see that, the bleachers?
Mhm.
So these bleachers are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 rows high. We're going to be 21 rows high in our gymnasium, which is going to put the top seats of the bleachers at about 18.5 feet high, as I remember from the Hussey catalog. And what we'd be afraid of is that someone could stand on those bleachers and reach up and touch the structure above and grab onto it. So we want to make sure that the structure is high enough that that doesn't happen too. And that can be accommodated by sloping the trusses from one side to the other, so they're higher on the east side or the right side on the plan where the bleachers are, and lower on the other side. That hasn't been decided yet. That's something we have to go over with the school district and with the building committee to be sure what way we want to proceed with that.
Why are they so high? Much more bleacher space, just in general.
I'm sorry?
Why so much additional bleacher space?
Well, for two reasons. With the MSBA's guidelines, we're not allowed to have, they severely restrict the size of auditoriums. And so the initial thought was that we'd want to have an auditorium to be, as a lot of districts have this thought, they want an auditorium to be something where they can have a whole school assembly. Unfortunately, the MSBA restricts our auditorium to being 610 students based on the population that we have. The population is about 925 by their guidelines, but it could be, that's an 85% occupancy rate. It could increase by 15% to about 1,080 at the maximum. So the district wanted to have a place where they could have a whole student body assembly at one time, and that would be now in the gymnasium. Secondarily, we were told by the athletic director that there are many cases where during tournament basketball games or volleyball games or something, that there's just not enough seating in the gymnasium, and that they have to turn away people from the gymnasium, or they're sitting on the floor because it just isn't enough seating in the auditorium. So one of their requests was that, aside from having whole school assemblies in one place, that they be able to accommodate about 1,000 people in the gymnasium. So, and on the plan, which I'm almost afraid to go back to, right? Because I'm afraid I'm going to kill it again. On the plan, if you notice, just like in the existing gym, the bleachers are all on one side. It's not something I've done before, but it's something that's existing here, and that's something that they seem to like in the district. They prefer to have, the away fans and the home fans all in the same bleachers to kind of, I guess, engender some public discourse and not have them have animosity. And they found it very, very fulfilling to have it that way. And so we kept it the same way for them in this layout. In the auditorium, the program that is being used by the school system requires to have a stage that is of a certain size, both in depth and in height. In depth, we're accommodating that in our floor plan. And maybe I should go back to the floor plan just so you can see that. But I'm afraid how to do that. Let's see.
Well, you may just have to close out whatever files you're in here and open the other one up again.
Oh, it actually says new share on the top. And so that struck me as being the thing to do. If you see this three-dimensional image?
Yep.
Okay, great. So in the back here is where the auditorium is, and you can see the stage is popping up. In order to provide clearances that they need for current system, this part of the building and the existing stage was built in 1999, 2000 era. The current applications for stage work for teaching different skills and whatnot is about 50 feet to the top of the structure. Obviously, that exceeds the height that we'd have for the 32-foot high limit that's in the zoning ordinance. And then the seating area for the auditorium also, if I can zoom in here. The seating area for auditorium would also be at about 35 feet. And that's only to get the clearance that we need for the stepped tiers that come up from, I call it the bowl, but the bottom recessed area at the face of the stage, and then going up to the top. If you've been in the existing auditorium, you know what I'm talking about, where the seat levels rise at a steeper grade at the back. And in the existing auditorium, that also currently exceeds the 32-foot height, as does the existing gymnasium. There are a few places in the existing school that also exceed the ordinance. I'm not sure when the ordinance came into effect. It was before or after the 2000 addition renovation project took place. But there are several places in the existing building that are also just above that limitation. One thing we would do is
What
that
prompts the 50 feet again? What exactly does that allow to have? Like 50
it
feet.
allows space for above the stage. The proscenium opening in the stage is going to be probably about 23 feet high, I believe. And when you have sets and things that have to go up and down in the back, and projection from the back, it allows that to go up to a place where it isn't seen from the audience. There are catwalks that cross above the proscenium opening, the big opening at the front of the stage, that are crossed at the proscenium opening, and for the headroom for that and for the lighting and stuff, the 50-foot is basically the minimum that we can have. It is basically the height we would go to before we have to change over to make the building or make that part of the building into a 3-hour enclosure. Right now at 50 feet, it doesn't have to be a 3-hour enclosure. And I think that's partly the reason that's such a typical height for stages and auditoriums in new schools throughout the state. Just to mention that.
What does a 3-hour enclosure mean?
That the concrete block wall that's around the stage area would be rated for 3 hours of fire protection. And that the stage would have a drop curtain at the front of it that's an asbestos type curtain that would come down, that would, in the event of a fire, would separate the audience side from the stage side. When you're under 50 feet, you do not have to have that. You have to have an hour rating, and you do not have to have a drop curtain. There's a big step in cost when you go above 50 feet. And we have a theater consultant that we're working with who's done most of the theaters we do in our firm for schools from New York City. And this is the standard way we've done stages in schools for probably the past 10 years. Just to mention that the building is what's termed a construction type 1B, which is means all the steel in the building is spray fireproofed with a protective coating to get a rating of 2 hours throughout the building. The existing building is not. The existing building is unprotected steel. It's a construction type 2B, which means that it's unprotected steel. And just to mention also that the other part of the zoning ordinance that were in that same section was to require that the building only be 2 stories high, and that's what we have is 2 stories in height in the classroom wing, and that the second floor can't be more than 15 feet above average grade. And right now we have a 14-foot floor to floor height, so we would be under the 15-foot finished floor elevation, and we would comply with that section of the code throughout the building. The second floor, nowhere in the building would be higher than the 14 feet above grade. The only thing that would be higher than what was allowed in the ordinance would be locations where we have higher issues with the roof. And I want to stress that we're still in the process of going through designs, that things are changing, as I said, daily, and that we may have other conditions that occur in other parts of the building that may also have to have this kind of relief from the zoning ordinance. I'm not sure of the genesis of the ordinance. I have a feeling that it was probably more geared towards residential construction, which is the typical thing you have in the town. But again, this building is going to be fully spray fireproofed to the point that the code allows it to have unlimited floor area. They usually, depending on the amount of fireproofing you have in a building, you're restricted in how much floor area you can build. But in a 1B construction type, you're allowed to build unlimited floor area in the building. So it just goes to show what the capabilities of that system is.
Yeah. So the height, have you talked with the fire chief as far as like that 50 feet high. So I believe in our town, we may not have fire vehicles that can reach that. I think
Right.
we've had a sharing agreement, but even on that sharing agreement, will that accommodate a 50-foot high structure? And do they have to be much like the fire, will they have to be able to go up to over 60 feet to get up above it? I don't know how that works on height.
We haven't reached out to the Lancaster Fire Department, and previous discussions with Chief Legendre, it was that there is a mutual aid agreement with the Lancaster Fire Department, and because there are areas in the existing building that exceed the 32-foot height, I understand that Lancaster responds to calls at the high school now.
So what's the highest height in the high school right now? Is nothing probably approaches 50 feet though, right?
No, nothing approaches 50 feet. The highest is probably about 35 or 36 feet.
Right. So that's an additional 15 feet. I mean, I don't, it seems like a whole nother story of,
Yeah,
but
it
again,
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah. So we haven't opened any discussions with Lancaster's Fire Department. We wanted to go through this group and discussions with Chief Legendre first.
right. Okay.
It made no sense to go forward with the discussion with them if if this was not going to be a non-starter for us. Typically, when we have stage access, the stage roof is accessed through the catwalks and the stairs inside the auditorium, and also with exterior roof ladders that go up from the roof on either side. So that's how that's typically accessed. I think that for life safety reasons, the second floor restriction at 15 feet is probably something that is in place so that if evacuations have to occur or someone has to go in and retrieve someone and take them out, that the existing fire department's capabilities can do that. I'm not so much sure about the access to the roof and where that genesis is. But that's the reason, again, for this discussion. We do have a couple of, like I said, the instances that have come up so far where we found that the design of the school, and this isn't capricious, like I said, this is something we have to do to conform to MIAA requirements for what they have in gymnasiums and to the requirements for the district's programs they have for stage instruction through the performing arts programs. They currently do not comply with the requirements, and that's really not something for public discussion, I don't think. I think Tanya Rich would say, shh, don't say that, but they agree that the existing gymnasium is far below the MIAA certification requirement of 25 feet, and that the auditorium stage doesn't provide the clearances that are necessary for them to teach the instruction that they need to for their performing arts program. Neither of these conditions are outside of anything we've done in the past with other schools. We just finished Attleboro High School in Attleboro, and their restrictions weren't nearly as strict as are in Bolton, and these are actually slightly lower than what we have in Attleboro.
And there's nothing mounted on top of these heights that, on the top of the roof with nowadays.
Well, there would be, and
is that going to even add to higher?
Well, I guess that was my other question, and that's why I thought that the ordinance seemed to be geared more towards residential construction, because it doesn't mention, and most other ordinances do when they have a height restriction, mention mechanical equipment and rooftop mounted equipment. There will be rooftop mounted equipment on this building. You're not seeing it on this sort of block plan done through a drafting utility we call SketchUp, which is basically volumetric. But this will get to the point where we've located units on the roof, fans or rooftop units or air units and stuff like that on the roof. But there will be, and so in the ordinance it doesn't mention that. It mentions spires and steeples and chimneys, but it doesn't mention anything about mechanical units. And if we were to put a 12-foot high mechanical unit on the roof, that would mean that the building can only be 20 feet high, which we would never fit 2 stories in a 20-foot high footprint.
All right, that was, so on top of these, like to the extent that over the gym or somewhere else, I guess we'd have to just think about or you'd have to think about it. And because all we would ultimately handle on the board's perspective is if we would have an application that came to us that said, we need relief from whatever, height restriction. If that height is 35, but then you have 10 feet of something else on top of it, is it now 45? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and then again, for the firefighting, aspect of it, if it's something that they had to get to the roof and now there's something 10 feet higher than, so I guess we just want to be sure that we're proactive.
Yeah,
on-
so this is, I hope you can see this too. This is the section of the zoning ordinance that we're referring to. So the first portion being 2 stories high, we obviously comply with that. The second part defining what the height limitations are, no more than 15 feet for the second floor elevation above average ground elevation. It's interesting to note that although the buildings, when you go from the grade directly adjacent to the existing school up to the roof line, certain places are, like I said, a little bit above it. That wasn't, and that discussion wasn't accounting for mechanical units that are on those roofs. That's just the parapet I'm talking about at the edge of the existing building roofs. But where it talks about what the average ground elevation is, the ground elevation around the building, because the existing school slopes from down from east to west, it's actually a floor lower on the west side. And so that drops the average ground elevation down about 6 or 7 feet. And if you were to add the 6 or 7 feet to the 34 feet or whatever they are above grade now, then the average elevation would put them at like 40 feet above. And I'm not sure, that's why I think that this is more geared towards a residential application, because the actual access to the building on the adjacent grade is different than the average grade around a building of this size, whereas average grade around a building that's a house is a little bit different in the ability to get around the house with a fire lane or something like that. We are providing a fire lane around the entire building, a paved fire lane, so access is provided throughout the entire site. But like I said, and then the highest portion of the roof is defined, excluding spires, steeples, chimneys, and antennas, but makes no mention of mechanical equipment, as you mentioned. And a lot of air handling units that we have on buildings, Attleboro High School, for example, they're the size of a bus, and to put them on top for the large spaces you have for, cooling cafeterias and auditoriums and gymnasiums, you need units that size, and they can be anywhere from 8, 10, 12 feet high, which means that if that's going to set your elevation for the top of the building to the 32 feet, then you've really got basically a 1-story building.
It looks like this was actually amended in 1987, so it looks like it was pretty old. And realistically, I mean, thinking now, I believe you guys intend to like air condition the high school and stuff like that. So that completely changes the dynamic. I'm sure people were not thinking about that in 1987.
And also the building, as I mentioned, is other than being the heavily fireproofed for the structure of the building as a building type 1B, it's also fully sprinklered, which in residential construction is also something that would not happen. So being completely steel framed, fireproofed, and sprinklered, I just, as I said, I don't know when this was, you mentioned 87 or something, but I don't know whether this was ever intended to be revised, or if it actually was, if it was developed with this kind of a building in place. And I don't know how the existing high school, also if they received any variances for what they were doing, and how that married in with this, if this occurred after the high school was built, if they were excluded from high school.
In 2009, we had a public hearing on the new public library edition that was put on, and that was over the height of the code, and that was an issue we dealt with as far as issuing variances. So yeah, it's certainly in this century that we've done work on public buildings with overheight situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Or setback, I think, were issues too on that library.
Yeah, they were.
Right. So Brad, so that's Brad Reed, who's one of the board members, just speaking. Do you know, Brad, just because I'm not expert there, with regard to auxiliary, like equipment on top of the heights, would that factor in as far as how high they would have to say?
My concern would be what's in that auxiliary pod. If it's something that's could cause a fire and we don't have firefighting equipment that can reach it, then that's an issue.
Yeah, right. That was my question.
In the equipment on the roof, you mean?
Yeah, like you got
a bus size structure now on top of 50 feet. It's now makes 60 feet, and now
typically. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They do have they do have issues with air conditioning. So it's something that I think at least should be run by the fire chief to see.
Yep.
We do have an office park downtown. I don't know where the air handlers are, but I suspect they're on. So just a question. What is the situation if you're going to have something the size of a bus, which has a bunch of compressors and other things in it? Then certainly something we ought to look at.
Yeah, and to the point,
I was going to say, is it possible, and I know you guys are changing this design constantly, so this might be a hard ask, but is it possible to understand where you would intend to put things on the roof, and then also where the roof access points would potentially be?
So you probably have one or two on the gym or beside the gym.
And that's 35 feet that you were just on too, right?
Correct. And then so you'd be adding height to that with these units. I've never had issues with mechanical units on a roof simply because they're constructed out of steel, number one, that typically the equipment in them is limited to fans and as Brad said, compressors. And I've never had an issue with any condition thinking that those were combustible. You can have electrical fires, and you can have that anywhere really in the building. But I've never had an issue with them having to be considered part of the building height. Generally, mechanical equipment on a roof is exempted from overall heights of buildings. So we would probably have one or two units on the roof of the gym. There would certainly be a one unit in each classroom wing. And that will put them over the height. There'll be a unit adjacent to the stage on the auditorium to cool the auditorium. And then probably one or two units around next to the cafeteria and all the service spaces in the back. We have some shops, wood shop, metal shop, mechanical rooms, locker rooms. In the back, there are two pre-K classrooms. And all of those would be cool, probably with a couple of units on the back of the building. So there's probably maybe 4 or 5 located units on the roof, all of them of which would be higher than the 4 feet that would, generally require that you be above the variance. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So I guess the two purposes for this meeting, once we realized again that we were going to be exceeding the height and there really was almost no way not to exceed the height, that we wanted to get clarity on the ordinance to make sure that we could comply, and if we couldn't comply, to express the need to submit for a variance at some point. Obviously, that would probably not happen between now and when we submit the schematic design package to the MSBA in June. Because that's still going to be schematic design. We will not have drawings from our consultants, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, anyone like that. It'll only be architectural drawings. And so we wouldn't have enough information to submit cohesively for a precision in a variance request until sometime after we start design development and construction
Mhm.
drawings, which would be probably after the first of the year.
Right. Which is, at that point, you probably have, like you said, some of these heights could actually grow depending on, whatever version you're in. So
And
it would be best to come in to, with an application at some point where even if it was not set in stone and you thought it could change it, if we were to condition it, it would be on like substantial conformity to whatever we have in front of us, so that, we didn't approve something, a variance request, and then you go and
change it.
try to build it bigger, and
Right.
then you have to come back.
Yeah, but as I said, the part of the rationale for meeting with this group is that at the end of the schematic design phase, even though it is, like I said, still schematic, the budget that's set from that phase is what sets the budget for the rest of the project, and we can't change that. And if there was going to be an issue with variances or heights or something in the future that caused us to have to do some other drastic measures, we couldn't change the building to meet with that after we submit and get the budget set by the state. So we wanted to bring this up to you and just to make you aware of the project, knowing that we'll be back in front of you again at some point. Hopefully, again, like I said, with more precise drawings that we would be able to submit for a variance, but also just to get a feeling of your interpretation of the ordinance as it stands, and how that would apply to this building, and if there would be a feeling that a variance application could be submitted, or if we're really just barking up the wrong tree. Like I said, we hate to use the Dover Amendment. It's something that we feel is a very aggressive thing, and it isn't cooperative with the municipality or the people, elected to the boards, and we would prefer to avoid that at all costs.
So you've referenced the Attleboro High School that you just recently did, and heights, and you said I think you said they were higher than this.
Way higher, yeah.
So did you have to do a variance for that high school?
No.
So their current zoning
Allowed
allowed for those heights?
It's a 4-story building with units on top of it. And the first story is 20 feet high because it's all shops and other uses that we wanted to remain flexible, so that they could take the wood shop and the metal shop and the HVAC shop and the automotive shop and move them around in the building. You don't have to worry about clearances for heights.
Right. So they must have had provisions, or at least in that town, either larger
Yes.
forces or whatever, or resources.
It's a city. It's a city, and they have downtown buildings that are much higher than that. So yeah, they had the provisions for it already in their city. They built a lot of commercial buildings in Attleboro, and so it really was something that it isn't apples to apples. And that, you know what I mean? That's why I understand for the rationale behind the Bolton ordinance, and I just wanted to make sure that we're okay.
So have you gone in front of other towns in Massachusetts with a project and done a variance request, so you understand the sort of the 40B process, the 48 process, what would be required? There's sort of 4 conditions in Mass General Law that an applicant has to address to allow for us to consider granting a variance. So that, there has to be a hardship. There's specific items that have to be addressed in an application. So, I mean, that's all you'd have to do at some point is, you or if you have an attorney assisting you, is that are familiar with the section, and you just have to speak to those 4 conditions. And
Minuteman was an example. Minuteman Regional Vocational Technical High School, where half the school was in the town of Lincoln and the other half was in the town of Lexington. And Lincoln's code basically was for residential, and so it was a similar situation. And in their particular situation, they had a 70-foot fly loft where you see the 50-foot stage, they actually came up 70 feet.
Hmm.
And so the variance they were seeking was even greater. And there was a process. They did exercise the Dover Amendment, but the thinking was that we wanted to minimize impact to abutters and street view, et cetera. I mean, so there was consideration there. But the bottom line is the school had nowhere else to go. They were surrounded by wetlands, and so they had to go up. Otherwise, they weren't allowed with Conservation Commission to sprawl out with the footprint of the building. And in that sense, we're in a very similar situation.
Yeah, we blew out probably 20 feet of ledge there, Marianne, to get the school and that auditorium at a certain elevation to minimize the impact it would have on the height. A lot of hoops were jumped through to get that to happen. And right now, this part of the site is slightly slopes. Like I said, it's actually a little bit of a bowl between the baseball field and going through the parking lot. It's like a bowl here. We're going to be filling that in, which actually brings up another aspect of the ordinance that I wanted to bring to your attention. When it talks about the average grade elevation around the building, it also says at the end of that paragraph, in the case of built-up land, the ground elevation prior to such change in contour shall be used. And so what I'm wondering, does that mean that if the grade here was 5 feet lower, let's just say 5 feet lower than what our grade will be to sort of bridge over the high point here and the high point here, and then the bowl, the low point here. If that's 5 feet lower, is that grade elevation of the original grade used to determine the height? In that case, that would be over 33 feet high from the original grade, whereas it won't be more than 33 feet high over the new grade that's around the school that's going to make this area flat.
And wouldn't that change technically the 15 feet above the average ground elevation for the
Yes,
first
it would.
two?
It would.
So
It would.
you could potentially need a variance. I guess that's an interpretational thing, but
I've never seen this before, and I don't understand the rationale for and that's one reason I highlighted to bring it up tonight, was to figure out what that actually means. Grades change on any construction project, especially commercial construction projects, a lot, whereas grade changes for residential projects don't, unless you have berms and other things that happen, or changes where you've got a stark change in grade from an existing elevation. You build up to a house up here, and you're trying to use that top of the berm as the elevation. But here, I just want to make sure I understand this, because that was my question, is what happens at a condition where we are changing the grade? Do I have to have my surveyor, stake out and document the existing elevation at the footprint of the building, wherever it falls in the final plan, and then use that as the elevation that I'm going to use for the variance application? It doesn't seem applicable here. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know I mean, again, because it's primarily residential town with limited commercial buildings. I mean, maybe Mike Savaggio, our building inspector, would have a little more insight on that, or even Brad from his planning board days.
Yes, I'll be speaking. I'm inclined to share that interpretation, given the spirit of these regs were built with primarily residential development in mind. I will be speaking with Mike Savaggio and sharing that question that I would like to have his take on, because this is much more up his alley than my own.
Yeah, right.
And I'll be meeting with Mr. Savaggio next Friday, not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow, to go over the code aspects of the building, just to bring him up to speed. It'll be the second meeting we've had, and just bring him up to speed with the building as it stands. But it's good to have, I think, this initial discussion with the board, just to be sure that you're aware, and that we're not going to walk in front of you in a year's time and say, "Oh, here we are. What do we do now?" We want to make sure that everybody understands what's going on, that there's no surprises, and that as we go forward, that we can move forward with confidence that the building can be built.
Yes.
And so Hey, the question, does anything have to, from, maybe this is a question to Todd. So does anything have to go to a town meeting before is this all been approved? The general overview and structure and layout and components of this?
That's really not exactly my department. That would be a question because that goes through BOS, primarily and other financial departments. That doesn't go through my office. However, I can get the answer for you and I'll share that with you as soon as I have it.
My understanding is that the town's going to have to vote, all three towns are going to have to vote to approve this project before it can be built or financed. So,
Yes.
and that will probably take a town meeting vote before that.
Oh, most assuredly, especially given the associated and projected cost. Absolutely.
Right.
But
so procedural wise, would that we wouldn't have them probably come in front of us until the towns approve the overall, budget for the
given that this is a variance, which is primarily just for use and permissions, the order of operations isn't all that impactful. One, we could do A or B then A. It really has no bearing on anything else afterwards.
The other thing I noticed was that section F defines that whole section as being for commercial, business, or industrial uses. And I'm wondering whether an educational facility, where does that fall in? It's certainly not residential, but I'm not sure it's any of those either.
Educational buildings are classified as commercial buildings.
Yes, they are. They're both.
So it has to fall under the commercial. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. They're used. They're built under. It's my understanding the commercial aspects of code in the international building code.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Question, Andy? Observation? Okay. Well, good. I mean, so you sort of know what we're thinking about, with regard to height and the current resources that the town has to be able to address height. So, obviously you're planning to follow up with the fire chief, which is great, or any emergency services. I would think even the police may have some type of interest in knowing how high the building is for safety, security. If someone was to get on top of the building and they had to, respond to something like that, heights and things. So public safety, and then, they say building inspector on some of those nuanced questions you had. But then at that point, you're right. If it's coming in front of the board, there's a variance process. It's pretty well documented in the town's bylaws and the application form, and it speaks to everything you need to address when you come to the board. So,
yes, and should the representative here serve as the applicant in the future, I'll be happy to concierge them through the process if they don't have any staff to assist.
Right.
Right.
Any other comments or questions from the board or anyone that's on the Zoom call?
I was just wondering have we come across the Dover Amendment for anything that's been proposed in the town before?
Yep, we did. So we came across, because Dover Amendment, it covers educational, religious, agricultural, the actual the facility down on Main Street, the mental health facility that had the goats in the barn and whatnot. They originally, that was a Dover Amendment process that they spoke to as one of the allowed exemptions was the animal therapy type of aspect.
But there's been nothing that's municipal governmental that's been sort of applied.
If I recall, there was when they were doing the new library or expansion to it was brought in, but I think they ultimately went the variance request.
Okay.
But so it's come in front of us to consider, but I don't recall that it was fully, used as the Dover exemption, you know.
Thanks.
Go back to read the notes, or if, or maybe Todd could double check that, but I think ultimately they went to the board so that town members could, you know, have an opportunity to be part of the public hearing process.
Yes. And to the chair, if I may.
Mhm.
It's in my experience and roughly 10 years time across several different communities throughout the state, it's not quite the standard, but more often than a coin toss, you tend to have built into the bylaws or ordinances matters of municipal exemption for issues just like this, whether it happens to be a police building that's a little bit too tall or any other public service building, or for educational uses as well. Anything that serves municipal use tends to be exempt from these sort of processes. It's a little atypical that Bolton doesn't have any of that language in place, and it's something that we would do well to consider into the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, because specifically like the Dover does allow for the exemptions, but they then specifically call out that exemptions that may not be covered are the sort of the bulk and the height of so it sort of almost directs them to come to the town for height type of limitations. So
yes.
yeah.
It does mention there's a couple of qualifiers given reasonable constraints and regulations.
Reasonable oversight at that point, right? So
exactly.
So we find ourselves as a reasonable board. So
well, you said it now, so now we're stuck.
That's right.
No, it's
being recorded.
It's interpretational. We're reasonable. Ask our 40Bs.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
I appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you very much.
Likewise.
Thank you, Joe. I'll be in touch if you need me. Okay.
Yes, and I say too, if anyone on the board has any questions or needs any more information, please, if you would send it through Mr. Miller, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Bye now.
Good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I guess, or end, I mean, did you update those minutes, or were you envision us to vote on those minutes tonight?
I would like those minutes to be approved with the edits reflected of the typographical errors and the attendance corrected.
So did did people read those minutes? I noticed that the composition of board members in the front didn't match the composition of the voting members in the back. So I know Todd said he's going to correct that.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else had an opportunity to look at them.
I noticed that, and I also noticed that my name is inconsistently spelled, which is like a very stupid thing. So don't worry about it.
No, it's
that was the
right.
case for Brian. That was the case for Brian's as well. So
yeah, it's one of those things where you just kind of blitz through and try to get it all out.
You know, I blame my parents for naming me a non-traditional way of spelling my name.
I mean, it's not trust me, I have a one-syllable name, so I feel your pain. Trust me.
Yeah.
I get
odd
John Bob.
I will get Gerard and Gerald, and then I'll get a Hearn with one with an E and a Hearn with an A. But as a board, we should be, you know, our names and whatnot, you know, not to be nitpickers, but we should have it consistently done correct, and we should have the right, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Not to be pedantic, but I completely agree. I'll make sure that those are reflected. And many thanks to Kristen.
And to the substance of the minutes, I mean, from what I recall, they didn't have any notes specifically written down on, but the fact pattern seemed correct. So,
yeah, no, I didn't have anything else.
Okay.
Lovely.
So I guess we just need a motion to accept the minutes, you know, as presented with whatever required edits for typographical or, you know.
Yeah, with
I
suggested
make a
edits.
motion to accept the minutes just with the updates for the typographical errors.
second.
Very good. I'll begin a roll call vote. I'll begin with Gerard.
Yes.
Andy.
Yes.
Bradley.
Yes.
Thank you. And Elizabeth.
Yes.
Very good. With that, motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. So then